Your Excellency, other dignitaries, Murumbalga, Bubalga Balga, Inabango Gibaban, Maingango, Burangumba Billajari Murban, Warijari Main, Narumuna, Injamaran. And the great privilege tonight being asked to say a few words to mark this, the occasion of the launch of Alan Arthur Robinson's Reconciliation Action Plan. I'd like to thank Michael West for his generous welcome and words of insight, reminding us of the depth of identity within this country. Identities which go back, as you say, Michael, 60,000 years, or certainly more than that. Or as we would certainly say, from the beginning of time. Also, as a Wiradjuri man and a member of the Kalari clan, it's my privilege to Muni Njamara to offer my respects, my acknowledgement to the people of the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, and say that it's an absolute privilege to stand here on country, although we are several feet up from country. I hope the window doesn't pop out. To be able to speak here tonight, but also the privilege of having lived most of my adult life here in Sydney on Gadigal country and having enjoyed the richness and the wealth of this place that's been generated from that very country. It's a wonderful thing, I think, these days to see the acknowledgement of traditional owners and the welcome to country become very commonplace. As you will all know, 10 years ago it was very, very rare. Now it's almost an Australian thing to do. And I think we can reasonably say it is an Australian custom. And I think that in part is where we want to get. I think what that acknowledgement does, certainly for us as Aboriginal people, is legitimise our place in society. But I think what it does in this very small act, I think what it does for non-Aboriginal people is it provides a sense, I think, of legitimacy of place, a sense of belonging. And it must be a wonderful thing to practice an ancient custom and be able to claim it as your own. I mean that in a sincere way. Not only is it a wonderful thing to see, I also hope that as we start to become more familiar with these customs and traditions, particularly acknowledgement of traditional owners and so forth, that we don't just do it as a sort of a half-mumbled grace or do it out of a sense of obligation. It's much more than that, and it's much more than an act of courtesy. It has, at its very basis, a philosophical principle. It presumes that the speakers and the listeners share a deep insight into the principle of interconnectedness. The interconnectedness of country, of people, of winds, of water, of constellations, of people past, people future, of the web of life. That to touch one element of the web of life is to affect all. And I think that's what I'd like to talk about in terms of reconciliation tonight. That sense of interconnectedness. I think if reconciliation is anything, it's a process that has at its heart a deep philosophical understanding, a sharing of that sense of interconnectedness. And I think that interconnectedness requires three things on the part of non-Indigenous Australians. I think it requires recognition, firstly, recognition of our parallel, our very separate, streamed experiences of life. The difference between, for many of you, your family's experience of this country and my family's experience of this country. But at the same time, our interconnected past, and I want to talk more about that. It requires an appreciation of our present and differing legacies which result from those different histories, but are very much with us in this room tonight, and we'll certainly go home to them, the issues, the families and so forth. And thirdly, it takes a belief. Belief not only that solutions are possible, but the benefits of those solutions are mutual. Reconciliation is not a charity movement towards Indigenous people. It's a process of nation building. It's a process that's intergenerational, and it's as much for you as it is for me. And I think that's the beauty of it. If it has two easy steps to reconciliation, I think it's these. They're easy to say, but they're another thing to do. I think the first requires listening and understanding. And it requires giving Aboriginal people a voice. It has to go beyond writing the cheque and ticking the box and saying that we did it. We started a program, we did this, we did something. It requires a bit of face-to-face understanding. Why? Because it's important for our healing as Aboriginal people. We need to tell you the story of what it's been like to be the byproduct of your success. We need, as partners within what might be described a domestic violence situation, the right to sit down, the right to sit down and to tell you how it's felt. Because we can't go up to the next stage. We can't have a box of chocolates, a bunch of flowers, go off to a dance and not talk about it, right? Silence is a form of abuse. And if you impose silence upon us as the first step, you continue the abuse. So we need to have a chat. Now, if I could give you an example of that. Oh, thank you. I've been coughing ever since I've had this throat thing around. I think it's a white people's thing. My grandmother told me we didn't have things like this. We were very clean people. You've got to excuse me for being cheeky. Some years ago, I was a member of the National Native Title Tribunal, and I had an office down in Bligh Street on the 25th floor. And as many of you will know, the Native Title Tribunal essentially acts as a mediation service for the Federal Court. And I was there one day, and some traditional owners from far west New South Wales were coming in to meet the representatives of the Australian government, as far as they were concerned. It was actually the Crown Solicitor. But this was the first time that they, and I won't mention their names of the people, but it was the first time as they, the so-and-so people, had the first opportunity to negotiate, to sit at the table with the representatives of the government they had lived under. I had a coffee with them before we started to settle their nerves. They were more nervous than I am now. And they had most of them hadn't been to Sydney before, but they had a great sense of occasion. They realised that this was a historical moment, this meeting that was about to take place. They were also very emotional because they had in their memory and in their hearts the names of all of the people who were missing. They had with them the memories of what it was like to be locked on the mission for generations, to have every opportunity to exercise responsibility and decision making taken off them for generations. And this was real and this was personal. So anyway, we go into the meeting. The Crown is represented by a young Crown Solicitor. And I don't know how things work, whether you draw the straw on the day or what, but this poor young bloke, he didn't have a clue. And he was there. The elders walk in. He's rolled out all these maps all over the table. And he starts talking. And he starts pointing to this pipeline that extinguishes something or other, and this fence line here, and this power line that goes here, etc., etc. And he went on for about 10 minutes, and apart from the elders not really knowing what he was talking about and not recognising the map as country in any way at all. They just sat there quietly. And after about 10 minutes, when he'd finished, they just gently moved the map aside and leant forward. And one of them said, "Before we go any further, we need to tell you about the process by which we lost all these rights to this country, and the process which empowers you as a young man to sit across the table and tell us this." And they did. And they did for about an hour. And I tell you what, they may have felt better by the end of it, but that poor young Crown Solicitor was a mess. And so they went their separate ways, and then I spent coffee with the young Crown Solicitor afterwards. And he said, "What happened? What happened?" He was like he was hit by a truck. And I said, "That's history." I said, "You are the most significant person that these people have ever had the opportunity to speak to. You know, Kim Wilson and I were on the Native Title Tribunal, and we knew the first thing that happened when you go into a community is people want to go bang. For that moment, you are Captain Cook. You are Arthur Phillip. You are the mission manager. You are the representative of everyone who did those things, and you've got to cop it because it's part of the healing process." And I had to say to them at the end of it that you know, it's hard for him as a young non-Indigenous man because he's never had a sense of belonging to a society. He's never had a collective sense of responsibility. He always just thought of himself as a good young man. And I think that's one of the difficulties that we face in this process. Not only do we have to tell our story, but the hard process for non-Indigenous people is that you have to develop a sense of collective responsibility. You also have to develop a sense of your collective and positive legacy as a result of that. Because as Michael said, not that Michael, the other Michael, as Michael said before, all of that was signed off. All of those actions, all of those things that happened to their and my family and the families represented in this room were legally signed off, was sanctioned by law. Each of those horrible things. You know, we have no love of the law as Aboriginal people. Someone said to me, the trouble with a lot of blackfellas is they think that law and justice are brothers and sisters. They're actually very distant related cousins. So that's part of the process that we have to engage in. And if you don't allow Aboriginal people to first have that place, that voice, you won't be approaching the table of reconciliation with the right understanding of your position and your role and how this relates to you. You've first got to develop that sense of, I have a positive legacy as a result of that history. Governments passed legislation for the benefit of the people, and the people were white people. This nation was built for you, not for me. And that's a very hard thing to come to terms with, particularly if you're a good person. But we are societies, and Indigenous people do have a sense of being governed to this day by another people. That's the first process. The second process is much simpler, less heart-wrenching, and that simply requires action. A lot of people have asked me over many years, and I'm sure they've asked you, and whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous people in this room, what's the answer? Well, what a silly question. Right? That's the kind of question you ask if you don't really want the answer, because it's an impossible question and it requires no action. There is no single action. There's no black messiah that's going to pull us out of this. There's no single act of largesse which is going to clear the air. There's no single policy that's going to result in change. What is required is quite simple. And it's something that I've truly believed for years. that if every non-Indigenous person just simply, within the everyday power that you have in your workplace, with the regular authority you have, with the everyday resources you have, just simply turned your mind occasionally to what you could do with that for the benefit of Indigenous Australians, and did that just once a year, that would be a movement of 20 odd million people, which I'm sure over a decade would result in a situation, a circumstance that I can't possibly imagine for that small 500,000 fellow Australians. So that's my challenge, that's my invitation to you, to participate in this. Participate in it and understand that it's about you as much as it's about me. Because I'd very much, as an Aboriginal Australian, as a Wiradjuri man, love you to have the sense of this country that I have. I would love you to have that. But we need to do some work before we can do that kind of thing. So, in summary, I'd just like to say that I think an effective reconciliation plan, and I think this is a very effective reconciliation plan, has in it elements of understanding and relationship, of personal responsibility and buy-in, a belief in the mutual benefits involved in the process, and that the action is localised and it's pragmatic and it involves personal interaction. I see all those elements in the plan, Michael, and in conclusion I'd just like to congratulate Alan Arthur Robinson for the courage and the initiative and the leadership that you've shown in adopting and developing this plan. And also, as you were saying, Michael, as probably the oldest Australian legal firm and arguably the most prestigious, in seeking to establish a meaningful relationship with the first Australians. I was also on the phone tonight to one of our senior elders, Artie Flo Grant, who's also the chairperson of the Wiradjuri Council of Elders, and she wished me to pass on behalf of the Council Elders and herself her warm congratulations and her genuine appreciation for the work that you're doing with us in working with our people and our country. So, on that note, I'd just like to close by saying, Mandangal Mojigari, Buyana Namaran. Mandangal, thank you.